Many tech leaders, especially in established 3PLs, they struggle with making the business case for a system overhaul. Because, yeah, you have something that's working, maybe it's not optimal, but it's working. So when looking at file-based architecture, how should business leaders frame the business case for an API-first overhaul to ensure executive buy-in?
Oh, that's a good question. I would rather not see it as an overhaul, right? Because all along we've championed the need for backward compatibility, right? Because it's an invasive change, and when you make changes like this, you don't want it to be invasive to especially existing customers, because not everyone would be at that pace or at that trajectory, right, to make the change, say from file-based integration to API, right, because they may just not have the business exigency or the business case for that. So looking at this from a 3PL perspective, right, a hybrid model is the way to go. It's what would recommend in that for this sort of change. Now, in terms of the business case to be made there, it's keeping up with the technology landscape, right? Best practices, ease in maintenance and support, and of course, the simplicity and speed of onboarding new customers, and of course, interoperability with providers, right, in the e-commerce space. So this is the business case. So, we can go on and on, but I think those key items, interoperability, right, being able to support modern e-commerce providers is key, which are predominantly API and webhook driven. That's one. The second is keeping up with the times, right, which of course just portrays the organization in better light, that they are technology responsible and advanced, right, with how modern day integrations work. So I think those are the business cases, and I would kind of frame this to be a hybrid model as against a complete overhaul.
Awesome. And you deliberately designed that integration framework to be platform agnostic. So it's decoupled from the WMS, OMS, TMS, and all MSs that are in there. So from a scalability perspective, why is this decoupling necessary, especially moving forward?
Beautiful question. Decoupling, right, is non-negotiable, especially in this day and age with the way technology is moving. Everything is more modular in nature. They're microservices driven, and you want to keep these different processes separate because they may, more often than not, have different core and source systems. For instance, right, you want to decouple outbound and inbound are two separate processes, although they have a lot of intersections, right, between them, but they are two separate processes. The systems responsible for them will be different as well. You have your inventory management system, you would have your purchase order systems and ASN systems and all of that for inbound. And for outbound, you have transportation management. We can go on into those, but that's not the topic of discussion today. But then keeping them separate actually gives you that flexibility to tune your integrations to these different providers and these different source systems as you see fit. So you can make a change to any of the downstream or upstream component without necessarily impacting other aspects of the business, right? Which is the hallmark of having a decoupled system. So you can begin to make changes, changing, say, your TMS provider, for instance, right? Or onboarding a new carrier, direct carrier integration on the fulfillment side is also another use case there. So all of these can be done without impact to other aspects of the business and systems that actually feed those other aspects of the business. So this is why we always emphasize on decoupling, right? Because it just gives you that flexibility and you're not tied to a particular provider. Changing your providers becomes a lot easier, right? Because the systems that actually integrate to the provider is a standalone system. even if they actually communicate further downstream with other components, but that is completely decoupled. You can make changes to it, changing the provider without recourse to the entire business, right? So that's the biggest benefit to having a decoupled architecture, especially on the integration landscape. Now, this is talking about integrating this with source systems. But when it comes to merchant integration as well into the 3PL, it's also keeping this modular helps, right? So you could have a merchant that have very bespoke processes and integration needs, and you don't want to change your source system. So this integration needs is just beyond mapping, right? Data mapping and enrichment, which we talked about. It could be a totally different process, totally different process. So decoupling it would mean, building, a microservice specifically for this bespoke integration to handle that, and without recourse and impact to other integration systems and other merchants. So that's also another benefit of have, all of the systems decoupled.
And how does this modernization, let's call it that way, impact the types of clients those 3PLs can attract? Because, tech forward, everyone. But I imagine that also those bigger retailers, they're also looking for such companies who have the technology up to date, who can scale with them.
Beautiful question. It's a changing landscape. And as a provider, you want to be ready for the expansions of your clients. So as your clients expand into other aspects of, other business and businesses and aspects of fulfillment, you want to be able to support them. I'll give you an example, right? So you could have a merchant that is predominantly in the apparel space, right? And then they then move into, or they then expand their business to include things such as perfumes and colognes, right? Which would require different type of inbound process for storing in the warehouse, which is more, which have to then adhere to certain regulatory needs, right? And then on the fulfillment side as well, these sort of items are classified as dangerous goods because of their content. So you as a 3PL provider, in as much as you're from an operations perspective, you need to be nimble, right, to be able to support that expansion. So assuming you're already nimble from an operations perspective, from an integration standpoint as well, you should be able to take that, because the item master for a t-shirt is different from that of a perfume, right? Just because of that regulatory component to it. So your integration has to be ready to support that, right? Or your client goes into cold storage and all of those. So assuming you already have all of the operational infrastructure to support this, from an integration standpoint, working with us would give you that flexibility, right? That nimbleness to be able to enrich the payload that goes into the source system, source data from different sources to further enrich the payload to meet those regulatory requirements, so that you can then support the expanded business that your client has. Because if you can't support that, they're looking else, exactly. Right? They're looking for someone else. But as long as you are a step ahead and you already have this ready, even if you don't have it ready operationally, you have the means to quickly have it ready, right? With just mere configurations. This is just days or a few weeks of work, right? From configuring and testing, I think, the client is happy, right? So from a business perspective, what is actually the benefits that you enjoy is that you can grow with your clients.
Awesome. That's all of the questions that I had. Thank you.
All right.